Hi folks, David Jameson here, editor of conta.co.uk, and I'm just going to do another one of these little updates where I'm chatting about events in Scottish politics. Obviously this week, something that's grabbed a lot of headlines has been the crisis in the Scottish fishing industry. Over the last few years, obviously, fishing communities have become kind of symbolic of wider debates around Brexit. And I think it's fair to say those fishing communities and their interests have been used and abused by various political actors, not least by right-wing Brexiteers, many of whom have always claimed the plight of fishing communities, which have suffered extreme economic stress in recent years, that the plight of those communities is representative of their general critique of the European Union, and that leaving the European Union would be their remedy to the problems faced by those communities. It was a convenient argument, I think, for some on the right of the Brexit campaign to tap into a more general sense of anxiety over industrial decline in Britain in recent decades, the loss of status, the loss of job opportunities, the loss of income, the collapse of communities that process has entailed. And that's a very real process that's really instructive of modern British politics. Now, obviously, we've left the European Union under an agreement between the British state and the EU, and Scotland's fishing communities are suffering terribly. The inefficiencies of that new treaty system mean that Scottish fishing communities are struggling to sell on their produce into the European market. And there's been a range of responses to this. Some grossly unhelpful. I'll just dismiss them out of hand. The first is to mock fishing communities who supported leaving the European Union, which is obviously a disgraceful thing to do under any circumstances. This is a community that suffered a lot because of the free market policies of the European Union. And now they're suffering because of the free market policies of the British state. To either mock that or to respond by saying, well, what we need is a different type of free market policy, is obviously to miss the point in the situation. And this is how politics has very often become polarized in the Brexit and post-Brexit period. You have basically a dominant argument on the right of politics, which is, well, the problem with the European Union is in some way or other, it's not quite free markets enough. And then you get an argument ostensibly on the left, which is we should return to the form of free market politics that we had under the European Union. And this would somehow help fishing communities, even though we know from decades of experience that it wouldn't. And so we've seen a real narrowing down of political debate, of discussion of economic policy, down to two different versions of free markets. Except there are some people, particularly now under present economic conditions, who are starting to say, why can't the state play a role in protecting industries that are under extreme strain? I mean, if you look around the world at the world's leading economies today, the state is making unprecedented, is everyone's favorite word, unprecedented efforts, interventions into the economic life of society. Tens of millions of people are on furlough schemes. Industries are being bailed out around the world. And yet, you know, when the fishing communities come under strain, bizarrely, right or left, there are very few people to say, why isn't the state responsible for this state of affairs? The SNP's orientation on this question is first of all, obviously, to sort of blame Brexit, to make that a general framing of the political situation. And then to say, well, the British state should be giving money to these communities. And obviously, I agree with that. There should be emergency funds towards industries that are struggling through no fault of their own. Who could disagree with that? And at the moment, the Tories fund to cover everyone whose business has been disrupted under the terms of the new trade deal amounts to £23 million, which is nothing, basically, when we're talking about a crisis of this scale. But again, the basic logic of this argument is free markets plus occasional bungs of very small figures when you compare it to, the banks or the airlines and all these industries that have been bailed out to the tune of unimaginable sums of money. It's surely time that an argument is put for a much more fulsome form of state intervention. And the difference now, compared to a few weeks ago, is that the British state has more leeway to do that. So under our agreement, I say our agreement, the agreement brokered by the Tories with the European Commission, the British state has genuinely more leeway to play with state aid. The way that this is actually worked out is that profit-seeking commercial type activities are still fairly restricted on state aid as part of creating a fair trading environment in across European economies. But public policy, state aid for the public good, there is significant more leeway. So why isn't the Scottish Government saying to the UK government, right, use that power to, well, here's an idea of what could be done with the shortfalls facing Scottish fishing communities. The state could buy up the unsold stock. It could sell that stock at controlled prices through, private family fishmongers to families that are struggling with food poverty. So in that policy, you're protecting the fishing communities, you're protecting small businesses that are obviously struggling under lockdown conditions, and you're addressing a social crisis, which is obviously in the news a lot because Marcus Rashford, not Keir Starmer, has made it a major public issue. That sort of policy idea seems to have disappeared from, official mainstream politics, even when new avenues are created to pursue policies of that kind. And here's the point with this, I think. There's a concrete reason why that's not being done. There's a concrete reason why the Scottish Government is not making that argument or not taking action on its own terms with its own tax-raising powers, state intervention. There's a very simple reason, which is that in 10 or 15 or 20 or 25 years' time, the SNP leadership envisaged Scotland joining the European Union again. And the way that process works is accession countries need to have a long-term proven track record of sticking by the European Union's very economically liberal rules for how one engages in economic development. So my challenge to anyone who thinks that so-called independence in Europe, the official SNP leadership blueprint for Scottish independence, is progressive, that it moves this country towards a place where it's solving problems like industrial decline, and not just in fisheries. This was the same problem in BIFAB. BIFAB was let, to crumble for lack of state investment. And the pretext that the Scottish Government used was it would breach state aid rules. So we're now seeing crises in several industries, in desperate need of state intervention that isn't forthcoming because fundamentally entry at some unknown future date into the European Union is more important than protecting those industries. What kind of false economy is that? This is a party which constantly churns out this line about standing up for Scotland. But these are key strategic industries that are rotting, shedding jobs, shedding skills that we desperately need for the future economic development of society. In the case of BIFAB, shedding skills that we need to, make this green transition that we keep hearing about, but nothing's ever done about it, so that we can pursue this independence in Europe strategy. So my challenge is, I need someone to explain to me why independence in Europe is progressive. It's not just a question of what this country is like once it's in the European Union. If it takes us decades to get in, that's decades of economically liberal policy to appease the leadership, the right-wing leadership of the European Commission. We need to prove ourselves. We need to be groveling supplicants for years or decades to prove that we're good enough to get into a European Union. And what we ultimately get once we join the European Union is further supplicancy status. If you're the type of person who says that they want Scottish independence because one in five Scottish kids live in poverty, that needs to mean something for our political programme in the here and now. That can't just be, sentiment. Sentiment doesn't help people, children who live in poverty. Sentiment doesn't arm us to take our own economic and social destiny into our own hands. And so, it returns us once again to this fundamental paradox. Scottish independence is flying high in the polls. At the same time, we don't have a case. We don't have a case that you could go and knock on doors and say, this is a rational, moral case for the future of Scotland. And, if we want to be angry about that, the only people to be angry at here is the leadership of the SNP. They have teed up this absurd, paradoxical situation. And it's not just irrational. It's not just causing us problems in the cause of Scottish independence. It's destroying livelihoods right now across this country. In the heartlands of Scotland, it's losing jobs, it's losing industries, it's shedding skills, it's shedding people's self-determination, their ability to choose and shape their lives right now. And we desperately need to get beyond it. So that's a conversation we're going to continue to have at conter.co.uk. And do send us your articles, your thoughts, your responses to this video. If you disagree, write it down below the video, or send us something at editor@conter.co.uk. And I look forward to speaking to you all again soon.